All righty, well, with that, I will introduce our speaker, Frank Bures. Frank is author of The Geography of Madness, which Newsweek called one of the best travel books in a decade. His work has been included in the Best American Travel Writing, selected as notable in the Best American Essays, Best American Sports Writing, and Best American Travel Writing. He's the editor of, he's editor of Under Purple Skies, the Minneapolis Anthology, and he's a frequent contributor to the Rotary Magazine. His latest book is The Shape of the World, Essays on Travel, Culture, and Belief from Rotary Magazine. Frank has lived in 10. Now, I never know how quite the correct pronunciation. Is it Tanzania or Tanzania? Tanzania. Okay, thank you. New Zealand, Italy, Thailand, and Wisconsin. He currently resides in Minneapolis with his wife and 2 daughters. Frank will be talking to us today about one of the topics in his book of essays, Weird People in the Wide World, How Culture Shapes Us. So we're going to learn about weird people. It's welcome. Not that we are all not weird.
Well, thank you, Peggy. And thank you guys all for having me. It's like I think my first repeat Rotary Club appearance. I was here maybe 5 years ago or something like that. Yeah, I was in a different place, but it was fun. It was fun, and so and as Peggy said, my name's Frank Bures. I'm author of a couple books, 2 of which I have here. The Under Purple Skies, the Minneapolis Anthology. I have copies of that, and I have The Shape of the World. It's a collection of my columns for Rotary Magazine, and I have copies of each of those. If anybody's interested, I can take credit cards and whatnot. It's organized. It's covers a few different subjects like travel, belief, the power of belief, stories, culture, and then there's also a section kind of dedicated to Rotary and running meetings and conflict in clubs, and not like, I'm sure you guys don't have that, but anyway, there's a lot of fun stuff in there, and I'll be talking about a little bit of that tonight. And I'll just tell you, I started writing for Rotary Magazine in about 2009. I was traveling in West Africa for another story, and I was staying in a hostel, and one of the vehicles had a big rotary wheel on it. And so I knew Rotary had a magazine, so when I got back, I emailed the editors, and we got in touch, and I started working for the magazine. And since then, I wrote over 50 columns and over 200 stories for Rotary, and visited Rotary clubs in Mexico and Kenya, Guyana, and talked to Rotarians from all around the world. So it's been a really fun place to work for. Did I do something? No. What did I do? Did I accidentally turn the camera off? Sorry about that. Okay. There we go. Sorry about that. But one of the main subjects that I wrote about, and I've always written about, is culture, and what is it? How does it affect us? How powerful is it? And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about how I got interested in that, and how, in the ways that we as Americans are culturally a little different, and finally sort of what culture is, in my opinion, and what that means for us. My own interest in culture started after high school. I went on a foreign exchange to Italy. We had my senior year of high school. I grew up in Winona. We had a kid live with us from Bologna, Italy, and it was just kind of a private exchange. And then I went to live at his house the next year and went to his school. And it really was mind-blowing. It was 1990, and globalization hadn't really started yet. So like everything was different. Clothes, the food, the music, styles, everything. And I was from kind of a small town and hadn't had a lot of exposure to that stuff. And school was different too. We had school on Saturday, which was terrible. And then every day we'd go home at midday and have a midday meal, which is where I learned that table manners were also different. One day I was just kind of sitting, shoving pasta in my face and drinking like whole glasses of water. And the sister of the family, who's my age, the oldest sister, she said to me, she said, you'll never get a girlfriend if you keep eating like that. I said, eating like what? And she said, eating like this. And I got a little defensive. And I said, what does it matter as long as the food gets into your mouth? And she said, that's so American. She said, here it's not like that. For example, Costanza is thinking about breaking up with her boyfriend because his manners are so bad. I said, really? That got my attention because Costanza was her beautiful dark-haired friend, and I actually had a big crush on her, and so I figured maybe if the boyfriend was out of the way, no, just kidding. But it was really one of the first kind of inklings that there are deeper things going on, under the surface, and there was this thing called culture that I didn't really understand, and I came from a culture that was different from Italy's. And that's something that I've always kind of paid attention to and notice these differences. And another area that I've noticed that we are different is like I said, clothing. For example, I was driving through Minneapolis in the winter, and I saw this flash of white off to the side, and I said, "Whoa, that's weird." And it was well below freezing, but this wasn't like white snow. It was somebody's legs, and it was a person wearing shorts. I'm sure you've seen these people. You're shaking your head. Maybe some of you are these people. But every year, this kind of subset of individuals head outdoors in their summer finest, basically all winter long. And the Norwegians have a saying that, there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. And I would contend that shorts in winter are bad clothing. But I also always wondered why. And if you ask people why they wear shorts in winter, they'll say things like it's more comfortable, or like it's a way of cooling down, or this is just who I am, And so a few years ago, I wrote a book about cultural syndromes, which are mental illnesses that occur in some cultures, not others, which what I talked about the last time I think I was here. And one syndrome that comes up in the literature is known as Arctic madness or polar hysteria, and in which, quote, the individual may tear off his or her clothing. And there was an explorer named Harry Whitney who wrote about some attacks he saw in a 1910 book called Hunting with the Eskimos. And he said, in one case, he said, quote, Trushku began suddenly to rave upon leaving the boat. He tore off every stitch of clothing he had on and would have thrown himself in the water of the Sound but for the restraint of the Eskimos. And then another report said Tongwe was attacked again by Arctic madness. She rushed out of the igloo, tore off her clothing, and threw herself into a snowdrift. And to me, this sounded only slightly less extreme than wearing shorts all winter. But again, I wondered why. Because really no other cultures wear shorts like America does. It's an interesting thing. Even the hottest countries in the world, people wear pants usually, or they wear some long, kind of loose clothing that goes down to their feet. And so I did a little research, and I think I was able to find kind of the roots of this phenomenon. I talked to a woman named Deirdre Clemente, who wrote a book called Dress Casual, How College Kids Redefined American Style. And she told me that shorts became popular with the rise of casual clothing in the 20th century. First during the bicycle craze of the 1920s, and then again in the 40s with Bermuda shorts. But most importantly, she said, was this thing called the Shorts Protest at Dartmouth College, where the students made this big protest, and shorts were seen as kind of anti-fashion and anti-formality, and as a statement. And this protest made national headlines, and today, and I think it made a big impact on the country. Today I think wearing shorts still has some of that ethos of, making a statement about things like youth and anti-elitism and anti-formality, and communicating that you're sort of just a regular guy. Because let's be honest, most of the people wearing shorts in winter are guys. But I think that's a big part of how wearing shorts became part of our culture, and why people wear shorts in winter and in summer, to communicate these things, which are some of our core cultural values, which are that, nobody is above anybody else. In 2010, there was a scientist named Joe Heinrich who published a paper called "The Weirdest People in the World?" ? And he and his colleagues argued that when scientists publish psychology papers or sociology papers in the top journals, top scientific journals of the world, the studies are based on populations that are drawn entirely from Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic societies. That's where the weird comes from. And they pointed out, it's a long paper, it's like 75 pages. They pointed out that those cultures differ from the rest of the world in a lot of stuff, kind of important stuff, like everything from visual perception to spatial reasoning to understanding of fairness and cooperation, and even like our self-concepts are slightly different. And so given this variability, they suggested that a lot of these studies might not extrapolate to the rest of the world, since our psychology and motivation and behavior are somewhat different. And they shouldn't be used for making universal claims about human nature, because they're culturally specific to us and And when you live abroad, especially in non-weird cultures, this is something that you constantly notice. And another place where I have seen this is in the realm of personal space. Because some years ago, my wife and I went to Thailand to teach in a school in southern Thailand. And it was a poor school in a small town, and the principal did his best to accommodate us. And they built a room for us to live in at the school. It was had a bathroom and a shower and lots of photos of the school's owner. And by local standards, it was very luxurious. But by our standards, it was missing one thing, which was privacy. Some sort of buffer zone between ourselves and everyone else. The room had a shared wall with the principal's office that stopped about a foot short of the ceiling. And so our bed sat against this wall, and on the other side was the principal's desk. So it sort of felt a lot of times like we were sleeping with the principal. And so that was a real illustration of that. But Americans are notorious for vast expanses of personal space that we need. I found one article in the International Student Guide to the USA website that said, quote, "Americans tend to require more personal space than in other cultures. If you try to get too close to an American during a conversation, he or she will feel that you are in their face and will try to back away. Try to avoid physical contact while you're speaking, since this may lead to discomfort." Which in Minnesota, I think we know about that. And I do this too. Whenever I get into a bus or movie theater, I sort of look around and triangulate the distance between people and try to pick the farthest place apart. And there's an anthropologist named Edward Hall who studies this and argues that this tendency comes from the fact that America is like what he calls a non-contact culture, similar to cultures in Asia and Northern Europe and Britain, who have an aversion to being touched by strangers. And he says that we reserve the space 18 inches away, up to 18 inches away from us for intimate contact. And 18 inches to 4 feet is our personal distance, which is reserved for good friends or family members. And then we relegate our acquaintances to 4 to 10 feet, which he calls our social distance. And then, and this is before COVID, and our public distance is about 10 feet. So if the seats on the bus were each 10 feet apart, we would all be very happy. And he contrasted this with contact cultures, where, like in the Arab world, Southern Europe, and most of Africa, where people stand closer together, they touch more, they hold eye contact longer, and in kind of Europe, generally, he found that people have a conversational distance of like 2 to 3 feet, which would feel too close to eyes. So those are some of the cultural difference that I've noticed, and there's a lot more, but you get the point. And pointing these out is always fun and really interesting to me, but it also doesn't really answer the question of kind of what is culture exactly, and how does it work? What is it made of? And because we all use the word culture and we all think we know what it means, but when it comes to putting like a real definition on it, it's very difficult to do. In the 1950s, there were two famous anthropologists who tried to collect as many definitions of the word as they could, and they ended up with 164 of them. And they included everything from all transmitted social learning to human energy organized in patterns of repetitive behavior, and another one was all products of organismic non-genetic efforts at adjustment. So I mean, in the end, they didn't settle the question at all. It's just a bunch of nonsense, and no one really has since then. I talked to professors in cultural studies who told me there is really no agreed on definition of what culture is. But I myself have really wrestled with this and thought about it for a long time and done a lot of research. And I feel like, at this point, I do have a better understanding of better idea of what culture is, which I'll get to in a minute. But it has to do with stories, and which I want to talk about next. Around the time our oldest daughter turned 4, she started making these kind of weird requests at the dinner table. She would say, tell me about the sad parts of your life. Or she would say, tell me about the scary parts of your life. And, this went on for a while, and she, and we played along, and I told her about my appendectomy in Africa. I told her about the time I almost fell off a cliff. Told her about the fish hook that went pretty much through my finger, and we talked about deaths of the family, and she would just sit with her eyes wide and just listen, like her life depended on it. And it wasn't until we kind of gone through this whole list of broken bones and broken hearts that I came to realize what she was really asking was, how can I deal with sadness? What happens when I'm afraid? And she was looking for scenarios out of which to build her own. And these stories were, like maps to the world in front of her. And after that, I started paying kind of closer attention to the books we were reading them and the movies we watched, the stories we told. And I could see that these were providing them with kind of outlines and scripts for that would help them get through their lives and guide them through the choices they would have to make. And the stories that they heard and saw around them were like paving the road kind of in front of them in a way, and shaping the world as they entered it. And I think to understand, culture, you have to understand the role and the power of stories. For example, some of you might remember possibly that my last book was largely about a cultural syndrome called magical genital theft, where people feel like their genitals are being sucked in their body and they're going to die. And which fortunately we don't have in our culture. And in 1985, there was a huge epidemic of this in the southern Chinese island of Hainan. And there they call it Suyang. And it was a panic that there was a ghost coming around to villages and trying to steal people's genitals, mostly men, some women too. And they estimated it was affected between like 2,000 and 5,000 people. But most significantly, I think researchers found that 100% of the victims had prior knowledge of Suyang, and they also 100% also had a fear of death due to genital retraction, because it had happened a lot of times before, and older people knew the stories. They told the stories about the epidemics of 1948, 1955, 1966, 1974 that affected hundreds of people. And in the end, researchers kind of concluded that traditional beliefs made Suyang first possible, and then familiar, and then real to the people on the island. And I think that's how stories really work. First they make something possible, and then if you hear it more and for people you trust, they make it familiar, and then in the end they make it real. And the only difference between the victims and non-victims was that the victims knew exactly what to expect. Because we all have an understanding of how things are supposed to go, and about the possible chains of events that stretch into the future and into the past. And if this happens, then this will happen. And our world is kind of built on these presumed cause and effect. And to me, that's what the essence of culture really is. We watch people in our lives, we learn the way things go. How do you get to the store? How do you talk to someone you love? How do you get through your day? How do you get through your life? And the psychologist Dan McAdams says that people pick and choose and plagiarize from the many stories and images they find in the culture to form what he calls a narrative identity, which is kind of the story of yourself. Except that I don't think the stories are in the culture. I think the stories really are the culture. For me, culture is a kind of narrative ecosystem that's made up of the chains of events that you believe are possible, familiar, or important, or true. And they run forward in time. They're causally linked, meaning that the earlier things in the story cause the later things. And there are root causes that hold stories together. And when you tell a story, you're often communicating those root causes, not necessarily the events in the story. And to the extent that you and another person or a group believe in the same stories or the same causal chains and the same root causes, you are part of that same culture. And to the extent that you believe in different stories and different chains of events and different root causes, you are not. And in the modern world, we're all part of so many overlapping cultures and subcultures that there's no single simple cultural identity for any of us. So what does this all mean? For me, I think it means a lot of things. But for those of us who travel and who venture out into the world and who, want to do Rotary projects in other cultures or function like that, it's largely a reminder to be humble and to remember that, the way you see things probably isn't the way other people are seeing them. And also, I think it gives us permission to just be curious and to ask other people how they see things and what their stories are, and try to understand what the root causes are at the bottom of their stories, and what the world kind of feels like to them. Because whenever you step outside your own culture, things can start to look a little strange. But no matter how weird a culture or a belief or a syndrome might seem, we should always remember that there's some kind of story behind it. So, thank you.
How many children do you have?
2.
You may have to repeat the question.
Oh, okay, yeah. She said, ask how many children I have. The answer is 2. They're both teenagers.
Oh,
Yeah.
bless you.
I would love to know what that little girl is doing now and how those questions that I gave before.
She's doing well. She's kind of amazing. She's on the ski team, on the honor roll. She's doing her IB. What is it called? The harder one.
International Battle.
Yeah, but it's there's a medallion, diploma, her IB diploma and stuff. And so she's really. We just last week went to look at colleges, and she decided she wants to go to Northwestern. So I don't know. We'll see. She could, but no, she's doing really well. She's doing really well. Yeah, they both are. They're both good kids.
How much are your books?
This one is 16, and the Under Purple Skies is 20. 21.
You do that for the camera too.
Yes. So this one is I gotta get it in the thing.
Oh, you purple on purple.
20, and then this one is 21, and this one's 16. So unless you have cash, 15. Yes.
You had a chance to travel with the children, and if so, what's that been like?
Yeah, in fact, actually, we've gone to they're in Spanish immersion school, and so they speak really good Spanish, which is awesome. I mean, it's such a no-brainer. They just learn it, for free. And then we've gone to Mexico a few times, and we just last December went back to Italy for the first time. I haven't been there for 25 years, and so we stayed with my host family, and we met Filippo, my classmate, who I sat next to and stayed with him, and no, she's out of his league. Don't tell him I said that, but yeah. No, but it was really fun, and they had a great time, and it was super fun to see all those people. And I actually, Anna Christina, the sister who told me I would never get a girlfriend, I brought this up because it's in the book, and I gave him a copy, and she had no memory of it. She's like, "Was I that mean?"
She met your wife.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. See, I did get a girlfriend. Yeah.
So is Under Purple Skies about Prince?
Under Purple Skies is a collection of, essays and poems about kind of Minneapolis and the Twin Cities by a lot of great writers. Let's see, Marlon James is in here, Kelly Barnhill, Carol Kalia Yang, and it's just a great collection of poems and essays about the Twin Cities area. And there are 3 pieces about Prince. One poem by a woman who's from Ukraine, who she first saw Purple Rain when they were living still in Ukraine, and they thought it was science fiction, like set in the future, and so she wrote this amazing poem about Prince. And then does anybody know Michael Perry, the writer? He wrote Population 485. It's a great book. He wrote me an essay about how Prince kind of changed his life. Oh, sorry, did I do that?
No, I'm doing it here.
Okay. And then there's one other, I can't remember what it was. There's one other poem about Prince, I think. But there's an excerpt of Neil Carlin wrote the first profile of Prince for Rolling Stone, and he let me use a little bit of that for the book too. So he and Prince are driving around in the Thunderbird in North Minneapolis. So it's pretty fun. But then the rest of it's more like we tried to cover all the aspects of Minneapolis, like food and the lakes and sports, a little bit of sports and stuff like that. So it's pretty fun, pretty good, if I do say so. Yes. Did you have a question?
Is the travel book, is not for sale here, but is it like on Amazon or?
It just went out of print, and it's getting kind of low on Amazon. There are copies still out there, but I think I'm going to like just republish it myself with a new afterwards. So, but that'll take a few months for me to get it up and running. But theoretically, you should be able to get it. You could
Just like more culture and not even country or part of country, even culture.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Impact that has on relationships and.
Within families. Between families, within families, even in my family, my younger brother, when he was 12-ish, became born again Christian and went to church where they were speaking in tongues and everything. And I went the other way, and so we're both part of these totally different narrative ecosystems that have completely different assumptions and completely different storylines and stuff.
Right.
So yeah, but
look, there, like every conflict is like, look at culture first.
yeah.
Like you're kind of like, oh, you,
Mhm.
but really it's not like you personally, it's like your culture and my culture, are kind of clashing a little bit.
Right,
And
exactly.
maybe takes the personal out of it a little bit to be like, oh, why do you, why is that? Well, your narrative is different than my narrative and.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, the tricky part becomes figuring out what is going on in that subculture and what are the stories that we're believing in, because a lot of it's you don't really think that much about it, just sort of organically happens, but if you can kind of get to the roots of what are the causes that we all kind of believe in that are driving this stuff, then it can be helpful.
Pretty interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Peggy.
Is there a particular American culture, we're part of it. It makes it most difficult to get along in other cultures.
I don't know if I would say that, that it's the most difficult to get along in other cultures, you know, it's just like, I think everyone will have a similar issue of maybe we've had the luxury, it's just because America's so big of, you know, not bumping into a lot of other cultures, so not being quite as flexible, in how things go, that could be part of it, but, you know, there's a lot of interesting research in like narrative psychology, and one of them, the sort of the Stan McAdams and some other people have figured out that there's kind of a core cultural American narrative is of redemption. So like you go through a difficult time and then you extract some good out of it, and then you're better off in the end. And a lot of other cultures don't have that narrative, and so, you know, they and I just was at a talk about this last week, and I asked, you know, what are other cultures' narratives? Because they don't respond in the same way to like redemption stories that we do. And they just, these are like, we don't know yet, you know, and nobody's really done the research, and so it's all kind of early days. Yeah.
Lee Johnson would like to know how you describe the culture of Golden Valley.
Oh, beautiful, welcoming and amazing.
Talking about the story of redemption, makes me think about film and how so many American films will.
Yeah, all of them.
And
Yeah.
watch a movie in France, it ends with, oh my God, there was no resolution, there was no happy ending.
Right, yeah, and that's very unsatisfying for us.
Very much so.
Yeah, and if you even think of like Greek, you know, Greek tragedy and Greek comedy, you know, we don't really, we don't really make tragedies in that way, you know, and they wouldn't be satisfying to us, you know, and so there are a lot of those kind of things that are just won't work here, you know, for whatever reason. I write magazine stories, and it's really hard to not write a redemption story about somebody. What was the acronym that you had? Western educated, let me see.
That's good.
Yeah, industrialized, rich, democratic. Yeah, and he wrote a book about it. It's like 800 pages if you want to read it. It's like, yeah. It's a good book, but I'm told.
Thank you very much,
Okay.
sir. And we have nothing. These are pictures. There was a contest in Golden Valley and people submitted pictures, hundreds of them, thousands of them. And we picked out the best and made them into note cards. So
Awesome.
you have a
Beautiful.
remembrance of Golden Valley when you're writing your notes.
Thank you so much.
So, this was quite interesting for me, being in love with an African-American man and being a Norwegian from North Dakota. So, you know, if you want contrast, we could talk later. Anything else?
In the winter?
I do not. No, Barry doesn't either, no. So at least we're on one sync, huh? So is there anything else to bring before the group? If not, we will stand and say the four-way test of the things as Rotarians we think, say, and do. First
Is the truth.
Second.
Is fair to all concerned.
Third.
Will build goodwill and better friendships.
Fourth.
Will be beneficial to all concerned.
And fifth. Have fun. Thank you, everyone. Make it a good week.
You do with that.